Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly with the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled The Effects of Natural Gas Growth on Solar Electricity Generation in PJM Market. We are grateful to our speaker, Joe Nyangon, for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations along with a host of other products and services you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our speaker. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our speaker, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated time at the end of the webinar to read and answer them. And now I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Joe Nyangon. He is a power systems economist specializing in utilities innovation at the SAS Institute. Joe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let me just share my screen here. So can you see my slide?
Perfect.
All right. Again, thank you, Rebecca, for that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining from. My name, as Rebecca said, is Joe Nyangon, and I am with the SAS Institute, SAS Institute, as we are known. We are based in North Carolina. And my presentation focuses on a paper that I recently co-authored, which investigated the impact of increasing natural gas-fired electricity generation on installed distributed solar PV systems in the PJM market from 2008 to 2018. Now, given the growing energy trilemma, that is the need to find a balance between energy reliability, energy affordability, and sustainability in the power sector, the question that we sought to answer here is how can compelling regulatory policies, business models, and technology solutions, and also innovative financing mechanisms be created so that these 2 vital forms of energy, solar PV and natural gas, work in greater concert. Now, my presentation reviews potential opportunities for hybrid gas renewable system configurations and services. It's also going to explore opportunities that can be derived from the synergies of hybrid gas renewable systems at multiple levels. Now, this is an outline of my presentation agenda. I will overview the PJM electricity market. I will then discuss the main technical market as well as policy factors that affect natural gas power generation growth on installed solar electricity development in the PJM territory, followed by a discussion on the effects of this study focusing on heterogeneity of solar PV systems as well as electricity prices. Lastly, I will share the role that analytics can play in improving electricity market design. This is a question I get often a lot in terms of the role that analytics can play, especially in electricity market design. So I will discuss that, especially from increasing integration of solar PV generation and price forecasting perspectives. So, in terms of introduction here, electric power systems in the US and other parts of the world are transforming rapidly. And this is driven by rising integration of distributed energy resources, the growth of variable renewable energy sources like solar and wind energy. There's an increasing decentralization as well as decarbonization of electricity resources and increased deployment of digitization and also sensing technologies. What we are seeing is that new installations of natural gas, as well as solar PV systems, have expanded rapidly over the past decade in the US, with continued growth in PV and natural gas capacity expected to continue. Now, of the total utility scale capacity that were, for instance, installed in 2020, renewable energy sources accounted for just 78% of new US electricity generation, with wind and solar contributing more new generating capacity than did natural gas, which accounted for 22%. Now, this slide here shows the historical as well as projected US annual electricity generating capacity additions as well as retirements. And the data for this graphic here is from the US Energy Information Administration, which estimates that combined fired and cycle generation units, as well as combustion turbines, as well as solar PV generating capacity, are projected to meet the growing energy demand through 2050. Now, with respect to the PJM market, our findings indicate that capacity additions of solar PV systems, as well as natural gas-fired resources, have grown as coal and nuclear plant retirements continue to accelerate within the PJM territory and also nationally. The first motivation for this study was to maximize the economic efficiency of the electric grid and provide some competitive price signals for solar power plants as well as natural gas power fired generation systems. The second motivation of this study is that while rising generation, particularly from natural gas, solar, and even to some extent wind, has accelerated decarbonization efforts in the PJM at approximately 5% a year since 2008. This change has actually not translated into some significant benefits for all consumers, because the ongoing innovations, particularly in regulatory policy, changes in distribution planning, improvements in interconnection standards, as well as some of the procedures that are being implemented, are expected to continue to incentivize distributed energy resource systems at the state level. Another important factor is that the rapid decline in the cost of solar has also contributed significantly to some of the changes that we're witnessing, especially in the market, particularly in the PJM territory. For instance, in the past decade alone, the levelized cost of electricity for wind and solar dropped by nearly 70% and 90% respectively, while the cost of energy storage, particularly lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, dropped by nearly 85%. Now, that is quite significant compared to where we were a decade ago. And falling technology cost of solar PV panels as well as wind turbines continue to push the levelized cost of electricity below coal and natural gas. But electricity prices have continued to increase nonetheless. And this challenges the interlinkage, particularly between decarbonization and sustainability benefit. So this is a major motivation for undertaking this study, to better understand the interlinkage between these two vital energy resources, solar PV and natural gas, especially in low carbon energy powered future. Now, shown here is the PJM territory, and in this study, we assumed that the PJM territory extends across all parts of the 14 jurisdictions. Now, PJM is a regional transmission organization. It operates a centrally dispatched competitive wholesale electricity market in all of the 14 or parts of the 14 jurisdictions, including in Delaware, in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, in Maryland, Michigan, in New Jersey, in North Carolina, parts of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and even Washington, D.C. Now, the PJM market structure addresses demand, it addresses cost, it also addresses ownership structure. And within the PJM market structure, participant conduct and behavior of individual market entities are always reflected in the market prices. So it's quite important, especially from a market structure perspective, the role that that plays in terms of the eventual prices that are reflected in these resources. As at the end of 2008, installed generating capacity of PJM was around 164,000 megawatt hours compared to around 185,000 megawatt hour in 2018. So there was a significant change there during that time period. Now, the percentage change in hourly generation as well as peak load was just about 13% for both between 2008 and 2018. Now, the PJM market consists of energy. It consists of capacity as well as ancillary service markets. It operates the day-ahead energy market, the reliability pricing, model capacity market, the real-time energy market, the regulatory market, financial transmission rights market, the synchronized reserve market, as well as the day-ahead scheduling reserve market. PJM has regularly procured capacity in excess of the reserve requirement at significant cost to customers. And this is to ensure that there is definitive reliability of electricity supply. Now, this is also as a result of a forecasted demand and also the shape and location of the capacity market demand curve. But the quality as well as the significance of the PJM reserves needs to be analyzed carefully. And that also lends credence to why this study is quite important. Now, this table shows some summary statistics for the PJM markets. Now, the market implements energy pricing with the cost-based offers and locational marginal pricing to better assign all congestion costs to the market participants who are responsible for creating that congestion. PJM LMPs are a direct measure and also a very good indicator of market performance. For example, the load-weighted average real-time LMP was almost 45% lower in 2018 compared to 2008, as shown here. Now, what is also important is that a well-functioning PJM market requires both an efficient supply as well as a demand-side market performance. The demand-side market of the PJM, however, is still underdeveloped. And this underdevelopment is a major reason why PJM relies on offer capping process when the local market structure is non-competitive. Also, another limitation that I would like to highlight here is that, and this relates to the PJM LMP structure, is that transmission losses are actually not borne by power generators, while farm access rights are sometimes rewarded rather than being penalized. And this creates a type of market distortion in the economic merit order. Outside of the LMP-based energy markets, energy is actually scheduled and paid for based on contract path, despite the fact that actual energy deliveries flows within these LMP nodes follows a path of least resistance. Now, this unique challenge of the PJM markets can only be addressed, in my view, through an integrated energy policy that mitigates these underlying market structure issues and also provide an appropriate incentives for investment in the transmission infrastructure. And this is a question also that I get a lot, especially in terms of how to address some of these challenges that you witness across different independent system operators or regional transmission organization like PJM. Now, when it comes to low carbon flexible generation, renewable energy generation constitutes a relatively small share of the PJM total energy capacity. But I would like to highlight here that this share is increasing and many renewable energy projects are actually currently under development. And we do expect that renewable energy, particularly solar, will continue to register significant growth within the PJM territory. Gas prices, coal prices, as well as energy prices are often reflected in the new unit capacity factors. And this figure shows the average capacity factor for new units. The capacity factor for a coal coal plant, as shown here, shows a very steady decline, particularly in 2022 compared to 2021. while the capacity factor for new combustion turbine gas-fired generation increased, and the capacity factors for the other units are shown here remain stable throughout the period. Now, what is also important here, especially from a synergies perspective, is that there is a need to analyze the metrics of these two vital energy resources in terms of their characteristics. According to Lazard estimates, solar PV and wind have become increasingly competitive with conventional technologies with similar generation profiles. And this is not even accounting for when an energy storage unit is considered, because if this is done, there is a significant competitive advantage that can also be realized. Now, as shown on this table, solar electricity generation has relatively higher capacity cost and generally zero fuel cost, while natural gas generation units have higher variable fuel cost. Relatively high capacity cost of solar PV projects still poses a hurdle for investors, even when the investment is cost effective over the long term, while large-scale developers can benefit from the various capacity subsidies, grants, as well as rebates, which are available through investment tax credit. Small developers, for instance, often have to raise startup costs with limited support. This is why there is a strong value proposition, in my view, for advancing synergies for solar PV and natural gas generation systems, especially improving on the processes as well as the practices for improving socio-technical design, especially of these electricity markets. And in my view, this should focus on, for instance, socializing, systematizing, as well as publicizing relevant energy policies to improve on the governance of the energy transition process. Because despite these well-documented complementarity benefits of natural gas as well as solar PV systems, such as the benefits of improved grid flexibility and control, reduced power fluctuations, optimized system integration, as well as reliable carbon-free power systems, the utility industry still considers renewable energy, particularly solar PV and natural gas industries, in isolation, or focuses on the underlying market tension and also antagonistic relationship. And this, in my view, impedes some of the synergies that can be derived from following a much more hybrid approach that capitalizes on the benefits of these two forms of energy. Now, in this study, we considered technical, market, as well as policy innovations that are actually driving distributed solar PV development in the PJM market. Now, this growth is measured by the total amount of solar generating capacity over a 10-year interval, net energy metering, renewable portfolio standard-driven, SREC, solar renewable energy credit price, environmental scores, per capita, energy-related carbon dioxide emissions, electricity price, per capita real GDP, energy intensity, as well as electricity consumption. And also the shares of different generation capacities like hydro, natural gas, as well as other fossil power plant capacities were considered as potential variables to explain the installed distributed solar PV capacity in the PJM territory. Now, these variables also characterize the energy dynamics of the 14 PJM states through Kaya identity analysis, that is by relating the percentage change in energy-related carbon dioxide emissions to per capita GDP, as well as energy intensity and carbon intensity, and also considering the growth in population, or which contributes to change in demand, as shown in equation 1. Now, the study leverages an extensive data set to offer relevant insights into the dynamics of the PJM market for policy authorities. The raw data set in this study is from the US Energy Information Administration, and this data set contains monthly reported electricity generation capacity of approximately 1,848 observations from 2008 to 2018, which represents nearly 9% of the cumulative total installed capacity in the PJM territory as of the year 2008. And so what we did is that we grouped the natural gas-fired generation capacity into different categories in order to highlight on the flexibility of the different resources. So for instance, combined cycle, combustion turbine, we group those together, and then steam turbine and internal combustion engines, we looked at that in another category as well. Now, let's look at the findings from the analysis of these variables, beginning with the installed distributed solar PV and how that relates to the flexible natural gas-fired capacity. By flexible natural gas-fired capacity here, I'm only considering the combustion turbine and the combined cycle. Those are the flexible categories that we regressed in the equation that I'm going to discuss shortly. Now, a state's investment in this fast flexing distributed generation, particularly distributed solar PV development, as well as flexible natural gas-fired generation, is an indicator of this electricity market transformation, and by extension, how these states are performing with respect to their energy transition process. And this table summarizes the primary fast flexing distributed solar PV, as well as the flexible natural gas-fired generation capacities in the PJM territory. Between 2012 and 2020, Indiana saw the largest growth rate of nearly 166% of distributed solar, while Washington, D.C. Registered just about 9%, and North Carolina registered 7%, which constituted the largest share of the state solar electricity generation capacity in the PJM territory. The average annual growth rate of distributed solar PV in the PJM region was about 31% compared to the national average of nearly 37% during the same period. So in terms of the solar PV development in the PJM region, that compares favorably with the national average. On the other hand, when we look at the natural gas fired generation capacity, we see a different trend. West Virginia and Kentucky registered the largest growth rate at 36% and 26% respectively of natural gas-fired electricity generation capacity during this time period. New Jersey had the lowest annual growth rate at just 1% of natural gas-fired electricity generation capacity. Now, the average growth rate for natural gas-fired generation capacity in the PJM area is about 11%, while nationally it's about 3.5%. So what that means is that there are more natural gas-fired generation capacity within the PJM area compared to the national average in terms of what other regions have. Now, eyeballing inspection of this scatter plot of monthly observation of natural gas-fired as well as solar electricity generation capacity in the PJM area shows a moderately positive correlation between solar PV and natural gas generation systems across the PJM territory. And this implies that gas-fired power plants and solar PV technologies are actually correlated, because we can see that correlation between natural gas-fired generation capacity and solar and distributed solar generation capacity are greater than zero. Now, the combined natural gas-fired generation capacity and solar generation capacity relationship in the PJM region is almost 1 to 0.393, or just 39.3% growth in distributed solar PV capacity. So that's quite significant from that relationship between these energy resources. Now, also we found that solar PV capacity increased substantially over the study period, especially in North Carolina and New Jersey. And this sharp increase follows the adoption of aggressive renewable portfolio standards in North Carolina, there is a 50% renewable energy achievement by the year 2030. And in New Jersey, there's a 12.5% by the year 2021. I think that's currently being reviewed as well. Now, a steady increase of flexible gas-fired capacities between 2008 and 2018, particularly North Carolina, Delaware, New Jersey, and even Virginia, also characterizes the start of the shale boom in the Marcellus Shale Formation, which extends across most parts of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, parts of Western Maryland, Eastern Ohio, Western Virginia, and also Southern New York. So there is another aspect to this, that in terms of how the shale boom could have contributed to some of the analysis that we did here, and we control for that in terms of looking at the market drivers for natural gas. Now, the other factor that we control for was the renewable portfolio standard. RPS policy stringency are considered as the most effective mechanism for supporting solar PV development because it requires a defined percentage of electricity generation to all that is sold to come from renewable energy sources. RPS is generally a requirement on retail electric suppliers to, for instance, supply a minimum percentage or amount of their retail load with eligible sources of renewable energy. This can be solar, it can be wind, or it can be, in certain cases, small hydro generation. And typically, they are backed with penalties of some form and are implemented at the state level. RPS policies are never really designed the same in any two states, as you can see from this graphic. Now, the other aspect that relates to these RPS is their variability, because variability in RPS targets poses difficulties, especially in assessing the policy effectiveness of these economic instruments, particularly if we are considering a market like a PJM, which has 14 different of these RPS policies that you're dealing with. Now, the third factor we considered is the weighted average SREC prices. And this is per certificate in selected PJM markets. RECs, which are renewable energy credits, are an important mechanism that a number of PJM states have deployed to implement environmental policy under a range of RPS approaches. These RECs affect prices in the PJM wholesale power market. They also provide out-of-market payments to, in some cases, qualifying renewable resources like wind and solar. What is also very clear is that some of these resources become uncompetitive, uneconomical, for that matter, without revenue from these renewable energy credits. The price of carbon implied by these REC prices at the end of 2018 ranged from just about $35 per ton in Pennsylvania to $5 per ton in Washington, D.C. On the other hand, the price of carbon implied by SREC prices range from $810 per ton in Washington, D.C. to just $18 per ton in Pennsylvania. We compared these effective prices for carbon to the 2018 average clearing price, particularly in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which amounted to $5 per ton, and to the social cost of the carbon, which is estimated at $40 per ton, to assess the impact on the cost of generation, particularly from new combined cycle power plant. And the result shows that for a unit of, for instance, $800 per ton, the estimated carbon price would be just about $280 per megawatt hour. And the impact of the $40 per ton carbon price would be about $14 per megawatt hour. Now, this wide range of carbon prices really presents challenges, particularly to the PJM territory, in realizing an efficient and a competitive carbon market. And it is important to note that not all PJM states have got SREC market. Michigan and Tennessee do not currently have a viable SREC market, as they do not have a solar carve-out. In Michigan, solar owners are eligible to participate in the Ohio SREC market, while in Tennessee, solar owners are eligible to apply to participate in the Washington, D.C. SREC market. Now, the fourth factor we controlled for in this study was the net energy metering. And from a policy perspective, this is very critical, just like the RPS. Net energy metering program are designed to, programs are designed to incentivize small customer sited solar electricity generation systems, and to assess the effects of net energy metering on distributed solar PV development. We calculated the natural logarithm of the total monthly net energy metering capacity that are reported for the PV technology, focusing on residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation sectors. This table here summarizes current net energy metering programs in the PJM markets. About 38 states and Washington, D.C., including 11 of the 14 PJM jurisdictions, have mandatory net energy metering rules that support renewable energy electricity development. Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee do not have net energy metering requirement as at the time of this study. Our data shows that the average annual total net energy metering capacity in the PJM market increased just by about 35% between 2012 and 2018. And in Maryland, North Carolina, Indiana, they had the largest growth rate in total net energy metering of 91% in Maryland, 81% in North Carolina, and 72% in Indiana. The smallest annual growth rate averaged about 12%, and this was in Pennsylvania, 24% in Tennessee, and in New Jersey it was 25%. So that just reinforces the point in terms of the role that net energy metering plays here in terms of promoting distributed solar PV development. Now, besides those factors that I have highlighted, we also investigated the influence of socioeconomic factors that might affect solar PV development in the PJM market. These include the League of Conservation Voters call the average electricity prices, energy intensity, carbon intensity of energy supply, per capita energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. The League of Conservation Voters is very critical here because this score is a control variable and acts as a proxy for assessing the consumer preference for solar PV in their respective PJM state. Electricity price variable is also an important merit order effect indicator of energy demand, differences in state energy policies, market structure, as well as local characteristics of installed density in PJM jurisdictions often affect PV electricity prices. And we found evidence that electricity price and solar PV development have an heterogeneous relationship. When electricity prices are higher, consumers become reluctant to subsidize any government-supported program or incentives through additional taxes. On the other hand, higher electricity prices can be used prudently to promote a cost-competitive energy market, particularly in changing direction of rather incentivizing certain technologies that the market seeks to focus on. Lagged per capita energy-related carbon dioxide emissions variable is also a function of the PJM state market structure. It's also a function of the building standards that exist, within these states. It's a function of the energy sources in terms of the resources that each state has, and it's a function of the policy stringencies that can be applied to reduce emissions. The top 3 PJM markets with the highest per capita energy-related carbon dioxide emissions in 2018 were West Virginia, Kentucky, and Indiana. These states also recorded the highest energy intensity. So there's a very interesting correlation there in terms of per capita energy-related CO2 emissions and energy intensity in those particular states. Maryland had the lowest per capita energy-related carbon dioxide emissions in 2018, which was 40% lower than the national average. Now, here is a summary of the descriptive statistics of the data set which I've just described. Overall, the share of installed distributed solar in the PJM, like I said, is still quite small. It averages just 0.26%, but it is growing. And when we considered, for instance, biomass and solar PV generating capacities, when we summed them up together, the capacity increased to 1.76%. And conversely, when wind capacity is added to solar, the renewable capacity totals just about 1.23% in the PJM territory. But the wind's share alone is 0.97%. So I just wanted to create that, to distinguish those particular resources in terms of their contribution individually and collectively. Now, the share of flexible natural gas capacity was approximately 13%, which is 2.5 times higher than the total renewable energy capacity, including solar, wind, wood, as well as biomass, and even hydropower. And the maximum market penetration rate of natural gas capacity in the PJM territory for the study period that we consider was 59%, which is 2.6 times that of hydroelectric capacity. Now, here is also descriptive statistics, now just looking at the individual states and the territory of the PJM. The bulk of electricity generation in the PJM region is sourced mostly from fossil-powered sources at approximately 81%. And the share of nuclear, hydropower, and wood, and also some of the wood-derived and even biomass fuels account for 27%, 2%, and just 1.5% respectively. Now, at different state levels, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland have a rapidly growing solar PV market. They also have a favorable solar PV market in terms of the market structure, installer characteristics, as well as renewable portfolio standard policy conditions. Also, they have very high socioeconomic variable scores, especially League of Conservation scores. They score in the upper 90%. They have low entry barriers and also rapidly growing distributed solar PV market. Now, in terms of the econometric estimation approach that we employed in this study to estimate the effects of the growth of natural gas capacity and utility choices on solar PV generation, we established a data panel model that combines time series as well as cross-sectional observations, resulting in a large dynamic panel dataset of 1,848 observations. Now, the dynamic panel data model aims to provide evidence on the factors that are influencing distributed solar PV market development. We regressed the solar PV capacity on several covariates that I discussed earlier. And we modeled the overall vector of policy controls in the PJM market as shown in equation 1. And to account for the optimal lag between the dependent variable, that is the share of the solar PV capacity, and other policy variables, net energy metering, RPS, and the like, we calculated the natural logarithm of the policy variables between time lag 1 to time lag 3. And the dependent variable of the dynamic econometric model is the solar PV capacity. Now, this is a function of natural gas generation capacity and all the other variables that capture technical, market, as well as policy changes. And we calculated the installed solar PV capacity by dividing monthly solar PV capacity by the total annual electricity generation capacity. So this is a capacity-oriented approach. And this is as shown in equation 2. And to investigate the relationship between solar PV and natural gas capacity, we conjectured a dynamic panel specification by combining equation 1 and equation 2 to generate equation 3, which is the dynamic panel model that now we employed. And we estimate the panel specification using the system generalized method of moments methodology as proposed by Brandel and Bond, as well as Alilano and Bova. And we use this to test the dynamic relationship between solar PV and natural gas power generation systems in the PJM region. Compared to other traditional econometric methods, system-GMM approach is quite superior here because it includes a number of key advantages compared to, for instance, ordinal least squares or within groups estimation approach. So, for instance, ordinal least squares and within groups estimations result in often unreasonably higher biased as well as inconsistent estimates of the dynamic panel data, as they often, do not account for inconsistency in the data set. And especially when you're dealing with business models, you're dealing with dynamic market, especially a market like PJM, you need a modeling methodology that are able to account for business factors, are able to account for changes in policy. They're also able to account for the dynamics of the technologies that you're considering here, in this case, solar and natural gas. The system GMM estimation approach, however, removes bias and inconsistent estimation generated by standard panel models such as pooled OLS or even fixed effects models. The other second advantage of employing system GMM here is that system GMM estimation yields efficient and also often consistent parameter estimates in the model estimations, in which independent variables are correlated with past and also current insights. Now, from a historical as well as current and future estimates, you need a modeling approach that is able to account for these types of changes and also be able to help, particularly where policies are involved, stringent RPS and also net energy metering policies. The third advantage is that of employing system GMM technique here is that system GMM tackles fixed effects as well as potential indigeneity problems of some explanatory variables that could result in the measurement errors and also the risk of omitted variables. So equation 3 therefore becomes our modeling estimation approach that we employed in this study. Now, the results of the installed solar PV capacity from equation 3 are shown in this table. And model 3 presents a basic estimation where only the investment tax credit and net energy metering policies were considered as determinants of deployment of distributed solar PV capacity. Model 2 presents an improved estimation in which both policy and some of the control variables are included. And then model 3 is our best estimation approach. It includes all parameter estimations of the policies as well as control variables for solar PV generation. It shows that natural gas capacity has an increasing effect on solar PV capacity estimated at just 0.91. Now, the results also indicate that natural gas capacity favors solar PV conditional on the other covariates that are present at the state level. On the other hand, there is no statistically significant relationship between nuclear and solar PV electricity capacity. After estimating the static relationship, we also applied dynamic panel analysis to also test further the relationship between solar PV and natural gas power plants. And for dynamic analysis, we estimated each model using, like I said, using system-GMM estimation. And the system-GMM dynamic panel estimation control for both the time-specific levels as well as jurisdictions level in terms of the 14 PJM states that influence the solar PV capacity. Also, where one or more lags of the dependent variable were included in the explanatory variable, the method clearly showed that the effects of change, particularly in the exogenous policies, variables like RPS or net energy metering, were actually at stake. Here is also the table summarizes the results of the system-GMM estimation outputs for the preferred specification of Model 3 now. There are 5 conclusions that I'd like to draw from this table. One is that system-GMM results indicate the flexible gas-fired power generation system has an increasing complementary positive effect on solar PV systems at nearly 0.798. Now that's quite significant. Net energy metering has an increasing effect on distributed solar PV capacity. The combined effect of the lag terms is close to 1, hence larger than that of the difference GMM results. And average electricity price shows heterogeneous results for different generalized method of moments and system GMM estimation. On the other hand, real GDP per capita and also energy intensity had a reducing effect on solar PV development. Now, these results represent a significant contribution to the econometrics literature in its appropriate use of the system GMM modeling methodology to capture the essence of solar PV and natural gas markets in the PJM territory in 3 main perspectives. One is that a typology of policy, regulatory, as well as business model constructs like locational marginal prices, rate designs, and also load capacity management in the PJM territory improves utility choices of distributed solar PV. So from an electricity market design perspective, those aspects are very important in terms of how they can be tailored to improve on low carbon energy generation future. Now, second is that market policies like net energy metering and also interconnection standards have an increasing effect on distributed solar PV capacity because they do motivate customers, particularly those in the high-tiered rate brackets, to consider solar installation and also support solar installation process. And the last one is that electricity price has a very heterogeneous effect on solar PV development. High electricity prices implemented through, for instance, public policy mechanisms like public benefits charge to subsidize the cost of solar PV might actually be counterproductive. So from an electricity market design and policy mechanism, those have to be structured in such a way that they actually help in solar energy development rather than creating further complexity in the market. Now, to conclude, our findings from these studies supports the conclusion that to date, natural gas powered system, especially combined cycle and combustion turbines, have not crowded out solar PV systems in the PJM market. Another important finding is that RPS-linked SRECs as well as net energy metering have an increasing positive effect on solar PV capacity. On the other hand, GDP per capita and also rising energy intensity both have a negative effect on solar PV development. And the shares of nuclear energy capacity, electricity consumption, hydroelectric, and even coal generation capacity did not have any significant effect on solar PV development. Like I said, electricity price shows a heterogeneous impact on solar PV development. And this is a topic for further research. And in conclusion, the results of this study shows that a careful evaluation of the potential complementarity and also distribution of values of flexible distributed resources like solar, PV, as well as natural gas, particularly combustion turbine and combined cycle power plants, is necessary when considering how and when to deploy these resources in the grid in order to enhance the benefits that can be derived to further support the energy transition process. So if you consider the conclusions of the PJM study I've just described, it feels like utilities in the PJM markets are in this constant race against disruption. We know that distributed generation, decarbonization, and electrification are major factors that are driving change in this market. Environmental, social governance, and also digitization issues are also weighing heavily on PJM market participants. At SARS, we have a utility customers, spread across the PJM market that we are supporting through our engagement with them in order to help them through these disruptions that they are facing. And the question that we often get is, how do we scale human observation and particularly decision-making processes to better address these changes that utilities are going through? And because if utilities can't see enough of the data that they're dealing with, that I've just described in terms of all these factors, if they can't see all this data to generate insights that they can use to help them in decisioning process, then they can't make enough decisions fast enough to overcome these disruptions we are talking about here. So the answer is utilities have to become proficient in the application of analytics in a number of use cases, because the new currency for growth is actually accurate decision-making at scale through application of analytics. And I'm going to get into this in terms of how we do it, because at SARS, we have a very strong footprint supporting analytics infrastructure of a number of utilities in the PJM territory. Leading PJM-based investor-owned utilities like Exelon, PSEG, Duke Energy, and AES Corporation and others rely on us to ensure reliability of their assets that are key to their success. As a matter of fact, when we were founded more than 40 years ago, in 1976, we signed on 3 main utilities, Duke Energy, Exelon, and Entergy, that we have continued to support through the analytics journey. And the advanced analytics that we employ currently powers a number of utilities across the PJM territory, across the country, and even across the globe. We also recognized as the #1 analytics brand in utilities by Utility Analytics Institute for the work that we do in this area. So I'd like to highlight a few issues in terms of the role that analytics can play here in improving electricity market design from generation of insights to better support the utility process. Now, this is our analytics lifecycle. This basically is an idea that if a utility wants to make a decision, it's got to answer some questions. And if you look at this visual, you've got data ops that you have to deal with, then model development, and even deploying the insights. Now, if utilities look at problems, this way, this is the most simplistic form, then they will be asking questions, and then those questions will lead them to answers. Now, if that is the approach, then the advantage here is that they will be able to make decisions faster than their competition. And that is a competitive advantage that they can be derived from this process. So if this set of loops forms the bedrock of future competition for utilities, the distinguishing attribute then becomes how quickly can you go from questions to decisions, and how fast can you be able to scale that across different entire enterprise, focusing on a number of use cases. I mostly covered solar generation at enterprise level, and also energy forecasting issues. But this can be scaled through a number of issues, focusing on analytics like asset analytics, can be scaled in vegetation management. It can be scaled to address issues to do with, for instance, electric vehicles and the underlying charging infrastructure demands that arise out of that. Now, to do that, there's a lot that has to be done. Now, think about how interwoven the utility industry and energy sector, for that matter, is to other sectors, and the underlying complexity that these sectors are dealing with. Each of these areas has to be addressed to deal with the complexities in these sectors. And the only way to do that, utilities have to overcome the complexity of the data, and the disruption that we are talking about here has to be matched to the simplicity that scales with complexity in a number of areas that utilities are working in. And this has to be addressed through a comprehensive set of capabilities. And what this means is that we have to look at these capabilities from a number of ways in terms of strong data management process, from how you develop pipelines of data, and then you visualize that data. And this has to be done in a very integrated manner in order to highlight the key insights that are going to support utilities in making decisions that can be able to support the electricity market design process, and also be able to improve on the overall energy transition process. Then there's a whole set of tricks and trades that also has to be employed here, especially from analytics perspective, in terms of application of AI, machine learning, and forecasting optimization approach, issues to do with natural language processing, computer vision, and how this can be interwoven in the analytics lifecycle and decision-making process in order to support a number of capabilities that we are talking about here. And these are the areas that we are working on. Now, there's also capabilities around forecasting time series data, because time series data is becoming a challenging process, because obviously with all the supply chain challenges that we've faced recently, this is an area with all kinds of disruptive things that are happening. Mentioned supply chain system. You have a number of geopolitical issues to deal with as well, macroeconomic issues like rising inflation as well that has to be considered here. Now, with regards to time series data, understanding the seasonality of the data set, understanding the variability of renewable electricity data today as actually a function of generation and also demand becomes very important, especially when we are dealing with critical low carbon energy resources like solar, and the role that natural gas can also play in this process. As utilities respond to these challenges, especially from a solar forecasting perspective, there are also insights that can be drawn that can help in the utility decisioning process. And I would just like to highlight a few. One is that reliably predicting solar energy production becomes very important. Assisting electric grid operators to predict and also to balance generation supply and demand for energy is also very important. And also rapidly changing weather conditions also have to be factored in, and you need analytics capability to be able to support that, especially addressing issues to do with cloud cover, and also if you're dealing with wind turbines, how do you deploy analytics that can be able to help you in detecting failure of the wind turbine assets even before they happen. So if there's a crack, for instance, on a wind turbine, how can you deploy analytics that can be able to help you in that? Now, our system deploys a number of these capabilities in supporting utilities to scale and also support high level of automation process. I mentioned decisioning. All this boils down to decisioning, because decisioning is a very critical aspect to all this. We have a concept of decision flows, or put differently, a combination of considerations that utilities are interested in. And when they make decisions, there are a number of areas that we look at in terms of what these decisions mean for particularly input as well as ultimately output decision. The demands for the problems that are required by utility, for instance, to put in, for instance, a number of modeling approach, and how those modeling approach can be managed, especially in a model from a model management perspective, so that if a model is developed, can we reuse that model 5 years from now? Can we improve on those models? If new information comes to light, can we go back to that model and be able to make those types of improvements? So those are the capabilities that we feel are very important in terms of addressing electricity market design issues, addressing the joint interconnection issues to do with solar PV market as well as natural gas market. So the key takeaway that I like to leave you with is that to transform electricity data, especially in a changing environment, into intelligence, we need to bring analytics to every decision that we are making. And to do so, utilities, particularly the case study I described, utilities in the PJM area need to access their efforts through the following lens of analytics. That is, analytics for every use case in their organization, and analytics in every technical, market, and policy drivers that impact the operation. At SAS, like I mentioned, we believe in bringing these analytics wherever there is data, whether that is on premise or is on cloud or is hybrid, through APIs that exist, and also in real time, whether it's on a database or a server. We believe in bringing those analytics to better support utilities in their efforts. And now, here is the publication of the study that I just described. We published this paper in Wires Energy and Environment. If you're interested in reading more about this study, the publication is available for free. You can be able to access it through this link, the DOI that are provided here. And if you have any question, please reach out to me. Let me check if there are a few questions that I can be able to respond to. Yes, so Michael is asking, why is utilization capacity per factor of combustion turbines so high compared with combined cycle? Both were approximately 33%. In our course, combined cycle is in the 70% range, while combustion turbine, steam turbine plants simply, that is simple cycle, is about 15%. It would seem combined cycle would be dispatched preferentially to simple cycle combustion turbine. That's a good question. I think that is, let me go back to that slide. So I think the question that Michael, you're asking relates to this slide, which shows that the capacity factor for, so combined cycle is the one in red, and from 2014 it increased until 2016, and then it reduced significantly, and it's continued to reduce considerably. Now, combined cycle is actually higher. So I don't know if this is the one, because I think this, you're saying that utilization factor of combustion turbine is so high compared with the combined cycle. Now, this is just a general overview of the average capacity factors in the PJM territory. For the study that I described, what we did is that we controlled, like I mentioned, we created two main categories for combustion turbine and then for combined cycle. Now, we considered those to be the flexible natural gas generation capacities. And then for capacities for natural, which are still gas-fired, like steam turbines, steam plant, and other gas-fired generation capacity. We looked at those, in a different categories. And like you said, both were approximately 33%. And that could be because of the control variables that we employed, and also for the study period that we considered. Now, there has been a lot of changes since we did that study. Like I said, this was from 2008 to 2018 data set that we considered. Now, the capacity factors, now even looking at this graph here, we only considered until 2018. Now, if you only limit yourself for the combustion turbine and combined cycle up to 2018, you do see that both are actually increasing at the same time. Now, after 2018, there was a remarkable change in the sense that combined cycle reduced significantly between 2020 and 2021, and then it actually increased after that. But combustion, combined turbine capacities actually was higher in between 2021 and 2022 after that. So there's been a bit of change in those capacity factors since we did the study. And then there's another question: in the model formulated, is the error term stated as a variable or as a residual diagnostic measure? Two error terms were stated in the model. Now, I forgot to mention that we employed a dummy variable as another control variable. Now, the error term is not a variable here, but the dummy term that we employed a dummy variable, which is a variable that help us in some of the control mechanism. Now, let me just go back to one of the results. I think to better highlight that fact. Give me a second here. Yeah, I want to look at the system-GMM data set. So, yes, so I think the one that you are referring to here, we don't have a dummy variable results included here, but we do have it in the system-GMM variable. Oops, I'm looking at I was looking for the descriptive statistics to show that. Yeah, so we employed a dummy variable as one of the control mechanisms, besides the policy as well as besides the market variables that I've described. We also employed a dummy variable as one of the control mechanisms to account for that. I don't see any other question. So I will take it back to Rebecca.
IAEE wishes to thank Joan Yangon for an outstanding webinar. This webinar will be available on IAEE's website for future download. If you're not a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.